Good evening, everybody. It's great to join you on a beautiful, was it Wednesday? On a Wednesday evening here in Park Ridge. I'm at AANA headquarters and look forward to the conversation we're going to have tonight and future conversations around how to make our organization and the organizations at the state level better. And so I figured the best way to start here this evening with this first CEO leadership conversation is around how to build a great board. And I think what you'll find is this transfers really nice into teams, right? So this is not just about building great boards, it's about building great teams. And I think you'll see a lot of overlap between great boards and great teams as we move forward. So before we get going, just a little housekeeping stuff. You get a free CE out of this thing. So make sure that you claim your credit and you'll receive an email from us, which will help facilitate that. You do have to complete the evaluation. Sorry, those are the rules in order to get the free CE. Please use the chat feature or the questions feature if you have comments or questions, and that we'll tackle those towards the end of the presentation this evening. So please stick around for that. And during the Q&A session, please click on the hand icon to raise your hand, and then we'll unmute your microphone, and then we'll have a little bit of dialogue. And just let me know who you are and what state you're from, just so if I don't know you already or don't recognize you, that would be helpful for me and the other attendees. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I was very pleased with the response rate and the participation rate in this. Clearly, not everybody's going to be available this evening, and so we're going to share this with all of our state leaders and the AANA board, and it's going to be uploaded to CRNA Knowledge Network. So don't fret if one of your colleagues is not here, because they'll be able to watch this at a time of their convenience. So we can see here is, a pretty broad representation of our members and our leaders here. I won't spend too much time on the slide because I think the good stuff is coming up. Again, I'm so pleased with the level of participation in the survey and in the webinar. You can see here all the highlighted states have participated, and many, if not all of you, are representing your states here tonight. So thank you so much for that. And we did deploy a survey. Many of you took that, and it was a 63% response rate, which is actually phenomenal. So thank you for that. And I wanted to give a high-level overview of the responses, so you all can see, what the state associations are doing on this checklist, this Great Boards checklist, let's call it that, and where the opportunities for improvement are and where you're excelling, and you can compare yourself to your colleagues. So let's talk about this. So one of the things we'll talk about later is having a clear and updated code of conduct. And I won't get into that now, but it's really important. And 80% of our state associations, at least the ones that responded, have that. That's a great start. Updated role descriptions, again, we'll get into all of these things in more detail soon. But updated role descriptions for the board and the board officers, 85%. 85% of state associations have that already. Conducting meeting evaluations, lots of room for improvement here. This is one of the things we'll talk about, how this can serve as the secret sauce for improving your board meetings. And so 80%, nearly 80% of our state associations are not doing board meeting evaluation. And if you're not doing a board meeting evaluation, you're probably not action planning to address opportunities for improvement, which is actually the most important part of the board meeting evaluation. So I'll talk about that too. This is this concept of using the executive committee or governance committee or some subset of the board to assess and redesign meetings. You're going to hear the theme about board meetings, hopefully, for the rest of the conversation tonight, how important it is to get it right. And 65% don't. So again, this is a great opportunity for improvement. Leadership development and succession planning. I was pleased to see that 60% of the respondents have a strategy. While 40% don't, I'm hopeful after this conversation, they'll be able to move in that direction. Strategic planning. This is so important, but also so painful. And so frequently ignored. And so 70% of our state associations have 12-month goals. And we'll talk about why that's so important in just a moment. And measuring. So what's the point of having goals if we're not measuring, right? So 50% are 50-50 here. And there's a real opportunity here to do some big stuff here with intentionality and measurement. So now that we've looked at the preliminary data, and hopefully we can do another survey a little bit later on in the year to see how things have changed, let's talk about great boards. And these conversations are so important because so few nonprofit associations pay attention to this stuff. And it is just so important for leaders of organizations, because we all have a fiduciary responsibility to be aware of the stuff and to move in a meaningful direction. And I'm here to tell you there is a better way. Even the associations that feel like they're doing well and they have made progress and they have dynamic board meetings and strategic plans and goals, there's still room for improvement. And so, again, there is a better way. And it starts with focusing on strategy. You can focus on strategy. Even our state boards, which I understand are very much working boards, there is an opportunity for you to be strategic. I was a state leader. I know what it's like to be a state president and have a lot of operational responsibilities and all of that, but there's still opportunity to be a strategically innovative board. You can minimize distractions, and we'll talk about this, and I think you probably know what I'm talking about, but good boards, great boards, focus on what's important and ignore what is not. Achieving goals and winning. These experiences that you have at state leadership can be so much more productive, so much more rewarding if you have goal orientation and a focus on winning. Developing a talent pipeline, begging for members to participate on committees and task forces or running for boards does not have to be that way. And it can be and should be an enjoyable and rewarding experience. I've served on great boards and I've served on not so great boards, and there is a difference. And when you're involved with a great board, you get energy out of the experience. It's extremely rewarding, and you get out more than what you put in. So let's talk about this. Let's get into it. Let's talk about what great boards look like. So great boards know the power of the A word. No, not that word. Accountability. Now, I might belabor this point just a little bit because it is the essential ingredient. You cannot avoid accountability if you want to be a great board or a great team. If you look at the best teams, whether it's a soccer team or a football team or a clinical team in the hospital or a board, every single one of those teams, without exception, has a culture of accountability where the president of the board or the leader of the team is accountable to the team. Individual team leaders are accountable to each other. You cannot avoid this. The challenge here is accountability is really hard because it requires sometimes difficult conversations, difficult decisions. But if you're serious about being a good leader and leading a good team, you have to take accountability seriously. And without accountability, you are dead in the water. You're dead in the water. It takes just one bad apple to ruin a team, to ruin a board. And that's where that accountability, that peer accountability comes in to address low performers or dysfunctional performers. So great boards are intentional about composition. And what does that mean? It means that most boards are poorly designed, if not at all. And so let's have a gut check moment here and say, well, how many of our boards have a strategy to develop an effective board, meaning its composition? You have to be very intentional and thoughtful about what kind of board you want to have and what are the skill sets you need to be successful. And this is about reverse engineering. A lot of strategy is actually about reverse engineering. And what I mean by this is, this would be a great generative conversation at one of your board meetings. It's a great thought experiment and say, all right, 3 years into the future, we have the best board of all the boards in all of the world. We are firing on all cylinders. And the reason why we do that is because we have a board that's composed of diverse people. And I say diversity, I'm talking about not just demographic diversity, but that's important, but also intellectual diversity. So imagine if you sat in a room with your team or your board right now and say, okay, these are the skill sets we need. We need a strategist. We need a clinician, in the trenches clinician. We need someone from academia. We need a business person. Maybe we need someone from the public. We need someone with financial or business acumen. And you're agnostic to names or people, you're creating personas. So think of the personas that you need on your board to have a diverse and effective board, and then go out and build it. Go out and find those people. Recruitment and development needs to be a strategic priority for every nonprofit or for-profit board in this country. Whether it's on your strategic plan or not, I think it should be, but even if it's not in your strategic plan, it needs to be a strategic priority. Conversations have to be had. Energy has to be allocated towards development and recruitment. Diversity is a lens. It's not a category, okay? So when we talk about reverse engineering, you were identifying skill sets and attributes that are missing from the board and that are needed. And then you go out and find these people. If your board is composed of 11 clinicians or 11 academics or some other disproportionate representation of skill sets and backgrounds, you're not fishing in the right ponds. So if you say, hey, we need the following 5 or 6 personas to be on our board, you need to find the ponds where those people exist and go find them. Example is that I was not going to run for the board of directors. I'm one of those people that, in all likelihood, I would have just moved on with my life, but someone tapped me on the shoulder. And the reason why they tapped me on the shoulder is because they were struggling to find someone to run for the AANA board. And they tapped me on the shoulder, and I said, sure, I'll do it. But I would not have been on that board. I would not be in the seat that I'm in now if someone did not tap me on the shoulder. So think about all the folks out there who would step up but just need to be tapped on the shoulder. Where do those people live and work? What ponds are they in, and how can you find them? Again, we have an embarrassment of riches when you talk about our educational programs. Frequently I have the opportunity to interact with and lecture our nurse anesthesia students, and every single program in this country has at least one rock star. At least one, and frequently more than one. And all they need is to be tapped on the shoulder and to be developed with intentionality. It is a wonderful resource for potential and future leadership. It should be a key priority for any state association that's looking at getting serious about leadership development. Spend time in those programs. Find the rock stars. They are everywhere. Frequently, they just need to be coaxed into and developed into leadership. Let's get controversial. This goes against what some people think. Those people are wrong, but I do think great boards treat board service as a job. And so let me explain. You have to treat board members as if they've been hired. If they don't want to do the work, they got to go. It's just like what happens in your employment setting. If someone is underperforming, if someone is not showing up prepared, think of the damage that does to the culture of that team, to that department, to that organization. Let's be clear here. No one is forcing anyone to run for a board. If you step forward, if you throw your hat in the ring, and you're selected, you're elected to a board position or a committee position, you have an obligation to come prepared, to show up, to do the work. And if you can't, you got to get out of the way so someone else can. And I think we sometimes coddle people too much in nonprofits and make excuses. But at the end of the day, you're there to do important work on behalf of your members. So if you have someone on your board, just like if you would have someone on your team that's not coming prepared, that's not showing up, that's not contributing, you have to have conversations with them, give them an opportunity to improve. And if they don't, they got to go. Which sounds tough, but it's what you got to do. because there's nothing that's going to destroy the culture or the morale of a board or a team than allowing low performance. Again, that goes back to accountability, right? I am a big proponent of 12-month goals, and to add it, the little bit more maybe flavor to that is 12-week sprints. Annual planning is good. Annual thinking is bad, meaning that having a one-year plan, which should hopefully be derived from your strategic plan, is a great thing to do. But you really have to be very intentional about carving those goals up into activities that can be measured over the year. If you don't do that, it's like me, New Year's Eve saying I want to lose 20 pounds, and I do well until about mid-January, and then I start getting fat again because I'm thinking annually. I need to be thinking about what can I do in the next 12 weeks to move the needle on that objective. And then you measure. Measurement is really important. If you're not measuring things, if you're not measuring progress, you are likely not moving the needle. This also gives the board a sense of accomplishment and ensures accountability and productivity. There's the A word again. We should not be afraid of goals. We should not be afraid of accountability, and we should not be afraid of measurement. Same thing with the committees. There's so many committees that just exist to exist. You're wasting people's time if they do not have goals, if they're not measuring those goals, and they're not being held accountable. Committees, and we'll talk about this in a moment, are just a wonderful opportunity for talent development. But imagine someone who's new to the profession or new to a state association, you put them on a committee and they don't do anything. What are the 2 or 3 objectives or goals? How are they measuring those? If you don't have any, then sunset the committee, create task forces. But imagine a committee structure that has clear and measurable goals and then is held accountable. Let's talk about committees, because this is such a huge missed opportunity. And this is the same thing at the AANA and many other nonprofit organizations. But committees can be the secret sauce for building your leadership pipeline. They should be treated like your leadership farm team, investment, development, and cultivate. And when I say committees, I'm also talking about task forces, which many organizations, I think very smartly, are moving towards decreasing the number of committees and standing up task forces where individuals can volunteer. So some folks characterize this as micro-volunteering. It's a great way to get stuff done without having a large, bloated, standing committee structure that may not need to exist in the form that it's in now. You need to ensure committee members are developed and vetted with intentionality. Again, think about it as your farm team, right? So if you're on a committee, maybe you're in AA. If you're a committee chair, you should be in AAA ball, just about ready to go to the board. During that process, when you identify high performers, high aptitude folks, you should be putting them in the opportunities to be stretched and developed and assessing how they respond to that. Conversely, if you have people who are not showing up, get rid of them. Because if they're not showing up at the committee level, they ain't going to be particularly effective at the board level. Again, committees need goals and measurement. Committee chairs need to be reporting to the board for a couple of reasons. One, it gives them the opportunity to have board visibility. 2, it assesses their ability to communicate effectively. And 3, it gives them a sense of purpose. And 4, the board can monitor the progress and the aptitude of the committee and the committee chair. Strategically, it may place emerging leaders in roles to stretch them and grow. We do this at the AANA and on the staff side, and certainly this makes sense on the volunteer leadership side too. Meaning, if you want to know whether someone has high aptitude, someone who's ready to move to the next level, put them in a job or give them a responsibility that stretches them. Give them something hard to do. That's the perfect way to assess someone's readiness, someone's skill set, their emotional intelligence, how they respond to stress, how they respond to adversity. Do it with intentionality. And the folks who respond well, position them to move up. Great boards work really hard on becoming a team. This stuff just doesn't happen. It's not like magic, right? You don't just say, okay, you're on the board. Now you're an amazing board and an amazing team. Great boards realize that friendships and relationships are irrelevant in the boardroom. And oh boy, do we struggle with this. You know, I get that we're nurses, we're empathetic, we're relationship people. CRNAs are amazing at developing relationships and bonds and that last for decades, right? You know, when you go to AANA meetings and even at the state meetings, there are relationships that are really important. But all that's irrelevant in the boardroom. And far too often we allow these relationships and friendships to cloud our judgment. And that's not good. When you walk into the boardroom or the virtual boardroom, you're there for one reason and one reason only: to advance the interests of the members, for the members of the organization, period. Personal agendas and relationships and friendships are important, certainly, but they should have no part, no role whatsoever in the decisions that you make as a board member and as the board makes as a collective. Great boards, because they're teams, see themselves as a body, not a collection of individuals. Let me dissuade you of some poorly conceived notions. Just because you have First Amendment rights does not mean that you can say whatever you want as a board member. You have to realize that 24/7, you represent the organization that you're leading, whether you think you do or not. That means you have to behave accordingly. If what you say and what you do does not look good on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, then you shouldn't do it. First Amendment rights are nice, but they stop the moment that you select or you decide to be a leader. Leaders know that they are held to higher standards. So how does this play itself out in a dysfunctional way? Let's say a board votes. Say you are on a board of directors and the board makes a decision you don't agree with. You voted against that decision. Well, you have a few options. You can speak with one voice and be a team, or you can go out and talk to your friends and maybe on social media, tell them why the board has made a terrible mistake. Option B is the wrong decision. Again, I can tell you when I was on the board of the AANA, there were a lot of 10-1 votes, and I was the one opposing person. Not once did I ever go out and complain about it, because I know that I have a responsibility to the board, and whether I agree with decisions that the board makes or not is irrelevant. You represent the brand of the organization, and this is something some people get confused about. Your organization has a brand. Whether you know it or not, your organization has a brand. And as a leader, you have a different responsibility. You're an ambassador of that brand. So if you're saying things and doing things that poorly reflect on the organization, you are damaging the brand of the organization. And then that's when the accountability piece comes in, right? So when we see board members or committee members doing things that damage the brand of the organization, then there's accountability that needs to occur. Again, great boards have orientation and onboarding strategies. It's like any other team building. People just don't show up and start to gel. You have to invest time in the orientation process. First impressions are huge from a cultural perspective. If someone or some people are going to exhibit bad behavior, they'll do it early. And that needs to be stopped immediately. If not, the bad behavior will only worsen. And that's where the A word comes in again. Bad behaviors, dysfunctional behaviors, need to be addressed immediately. And that starts at board orientation. That starts with the code of conduct. That starts with board meeting evaluations and board member evaluations. You have to treat your board members again like they've been hired. During the orientation process, during the onboarding process, they need to know what their roles are. They need to sign job descriptions or role descriptions. They need to have a code of conduct that explains expectations and accountability. They have to understand what the organization's strategy is. If you tap someone on the shoulder of your board and ask them, what are the 3, 4, or 5, whatever it is, 5 strategic objectives of this organization, and they can't name them, then you have failed. You have failed during your onboarding process. And this will be the topic of another lecture, I think, is problem solving. You have to create a problem solving framework so the board can tackle really difficult problems in a systematic manner. Great boards have great board meetings. So board meetings are typically a huge missed opportunity. A lot of people view board meetings as something you just got to survive through. And that's really unfortunate, because board meetings are an amazing opportunity to come together and to bond and to learn and to grow and to make big decisions and move the organization forward. If you have a board meeting that is not enriching, that you don't learn from or engaging, it doesn't have to be that way. Board meetings can be and should be designed to be enriching, engaging, and informative. And I'll explain how we do that in just a moment. So there's know-it-all and learn-it-alls, right? And there's know-it-all and learn-it-all cultures. Know-it-alls are the worst. They're terrible to work with. They're terrible to work for. They're typically deeply insecure, and they exhibit their insecurity through, I know everything, I've been everywhere. I know all about these things. They are the worst. And they're everywhere. That's where, as an organization, as a board or a team, you have to say, look, through your values and on your onboarding, say, no, we're curious people. We're here to learn and grow. We don't tolerate know-it-alls. Board members need to be in a learning and growth mode constantly. You need to be focused on, during your board meetings, how are you learning and growing? Because when you learn and grow, the organization gets better. And you need to construct your board agendas accordingly. Board agendas need to be focused on the future, on assessing where you're at against your goals through key performance indicators, and again, accountability. Avoid checking the boxes and getting into the weeds. Now, some of this is unavoidable, right? You have a fiduciary responsibility to do certain things within the organization that require some boring stuff, some boring conversations. But how do you as an organization minimize that shallow and superficial work so you can maximize the deep work, the looking into the future, the generative conversations, the strategic conversations, the learning and the growth, so that you can use the consent agenda. You can use reports and updates as items that you do not discuss, but you do process. So you can create oxygen and space to have these meaningful conversations. Again, strategy just doesn't pop up. You have to develop a strategitic board agenda that creates at least 50% of its time looking at the future and planning. And it's not fluff. It's not, it's not pie in the sky. This is what high performance boards do. Again, great boards create a culture that is focused on leadership and professional development. This is how you recruit talent. Board service is a leadership and professional opportunity. You're never done developing, ever. And this is what attracts high performance board members. If you can market your experiences as a board member, I got so much out of this. I learned about finance and strategy. I learned how to deal with difficult people and make difficult decisions. I got so much out of this that I can take and use it in my career, or I can use it with my family or other boards. That's what you want people to walk away from. You don't want people to walk away thinking, I checked a bunch of boxes, talked about napkins at the meeting, and argued over meaningless and superficial things. However, if you create an opportunity for people to be focused on these forward-thinking, strategic conversations, learning and growth, you will have to do very little recruitment. People will come to you because your brand as a board and as an organization will become known. And you market that up as an opportunity, board service as an opportunity to grow and develop. this is something I'm passionate about, which is decision making. Here's something that's controversial. Most people are terrible decision makers. And so I'm sure some of you may not appreciate that comment or observation, but it's true. Most of us are terrible problem solvers. And high-performing boards use a decision-making framework to make difficult decisions. And let me explain a little bit. In the operating room, in the clinical environment, nurse anesthetists are the best of the best. Make decisions, split-second decisions, high-stakes, difficult decisions that if you don't get it right, people get hurt or die. And that inculcates into our heads a certain kind of decision-making approach, which is extremely counterproductive outside of the operating room. So what makes us a good decision maker in the operating room actually makes us a really bad decision maker in the boardroom, because we're talking about different kinds of problems. Clinical decisions are very different than strategic problems or strategic decisions. So high-performing boards do not, I should back up, high-performing boards do use a decision-making framework, and this, I think, is going to be my next talk. And I would like to teach all of you how to make really difficult decisions using a framework. Great boards or amazing boards make decisions with mission and strategy front and center, not fear. And let me explain a little bit. Your mission and your vision and your values and your strategy, that is not fluff. That is the heart and soul of your organization. If it's not right, get it right. Because when you're presented with difficult decisions, you should go back to that. That's where that's the resource that you use to make difficult decisions. Fear-based decision-making destroys organizations and hurts boards. You have to be prepared to make difficult decisions that are, at times, controversial or unpopular. So how do you do that? How do you make a decision that is unpopular, potentially, with your constituents, but it's still the right decision? It's when you go back to your values and your mission and your vision and your strategic goals. Fear-based decision-making, whether you're getting pressured on social media or people who are misinformed or aggressively misinformed, are creating a lot of tension within the organization. I know it's difficult, but you can't go towards fear-based decision-making. Great boards honor the importance of mistakes. This is something that we struggle with as nurse anesthetists, because we're trained from day one that mistakes hurt people. You don't ever want to make a mistake. You have to have all the answers, and everything you do has to be perfect. Well, that's terrible. That's a terrible mindset if you're in business or if you're in organizational leadership, because fear of mistakes is going to be highly problematic for you to innovate, learn, and grow. The mantra that I embrace is try, fail, learn, and repeat. You need to embrace risk-taking, because risk-taking results in innovation, and innovation results in winning. So it's really difficult for us as clinicians to embrace this, but mistakes are really good. They're really healthy. Because think about all of the things, the major things that you've learned in your career or in your life typically are a result of a mistake that you made. We don't learn very much from winning. We do learn a lot from mistakes. So how do you create that culture at the board level where let's try something? Even if it fails, we learn from that failure. So I shared the checklist and I shared the results. The call to action that I would have for all of you is share this video with all of your board members. And we'll help you do that by providing a link. And place some time on your next board meeting. I know 60 minutes is a big ask, but what else is more important than creating a great board? Go over the checklist, go over the results, and discuss this video. And then do something about it. Identify no more than 3 things. I want to reiterate this. Please do not create a 10-item action plan. You will fail. Work on 1 thing or 2 things. Maybe 3, but no more. And then measure that and see how you do. And ask for help. And try to do some things here to move the needle on moving you closer to being an exceptional board. And then join me in the upcoming CEO Round session. So the next engagement opportunity, and this is new as well, is come join me and we'll talk about this. I want to know about your progress on this. Was it difficult? What have you learned? How can I help? How was I wrong? What resources can the AANA help provide? What insight can you help me gain from this? Because remember, great leaders are great learners. So I believe that is the end. So I'd love to hear some comments and questions. I'd love to be challenged, disagreed with. Any feedback is more than welcome.
Randy, thank you. This is Louis. I just emailed you about 6 or 7 questions that we have captured from the chat. If you don't mind reading them and try to answer them, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to look at my phone because I want to pull my email up. Let's see. All right, so I got some questions here. 6 questions. And strategy and composition sometimes viewed by our members as elitist. Ooh, this is going to be good. Okay, as an elitist strategy. Same thought persons are in the same field, right? I do not think that there should be a balance of diversity of ideas and opinions. The delivery and how to bring everybody together on the table, having one voice is the challenge. How do we do this? So the people who say that strategy and composition are an elitist strategy are wrong. They're very wrong. High-performing organizations view the composition of their leadership as their most important priority. And I view that, at the AANA with my staff too. There's nothing more important that I can do than ensure that the culture and the team is up to the challenges that we have. So I think this is about education. I think it's about being persistent. I do think, and I do understand, I've heard this before, that, if we have, if we go out and proactively identify people with certain skill sets and aptitude, and we move them through the leadership pipeline, somehow it becomes this incestuous, closed loop elitist. That is just nonsense. That's nonsense. That's 1940s governance that is no longer relevant in a dynamic environment where high-performing boards need to be agile and responsive to what's happening in their environment. You have to. I mean, it's like, when you build a soccer team, you don't have 11 forwards, right? So you need that diversify the skill set. And when I say diversify, you need people who come from diverse backgrounds. And this does include demographic diversity. I'm talking about age and gender and sexual orientation and ethnicity. That's important too. But also where they come from, because if you don't, you're going to have blind spots. So, the one voice, the delivery of how to bring to everybody together is one voice. And there are challenges. Many organizations struggle with someone wandering off into the wilderness, saying and doing stupid things. That's not uncommon. How you deal with that is through accountability. You at day one say, this is the code of conduct. You sign this code of conduct and you agree to comport yourself accordingly. And if someone ventures off outside of that, then the board comes together and say, hey, Jane Doe or John Doe, you signed this code of conduct and this is not acceptable. And these are our expectations. If this happens again, you're gone. So great question. Creating the need is a challenge for CRNAs to be involved. Can the AANA provide a needs challenge type of assessment so that we can find these rock stars? That's a great question. Great question. And I'll tell you, so how can the AANA help everyone at the state level understand what that composition, that ideal composition is? And I think there'll be some variability, certainly, but I think there'll be more overlap than not. And we're having this conversation right now with our governance task force, is how do we, with intentionality, create a board of directors that is composed of the diverse backgrounds that we need to be successful. We're not there yet, but there are organizations that are. So yes, as the AANA moves forward on its journey to be a high-performance board and a high-performance organization, I think it's a great idea for us to share that work with our state colleagues as well. Yeah, committees, another question. Committees are great, but sometimes require a lot of time. Is there a program by the AANA or the state association in the recruitment and or development of micro-volunteers? Again, this is another area where I'll say the AANA is moving in this direction, but the AANA also has way too many standing committees, way too many standing committees. So we're having conversations again with the governance task force about whether or not we need to, and we do, in my opinion, decrease the number of standing committees and stand up task forces that are focused on discrete, time-boxed initiatives that are related to strategic goals. So the recommendation, again, this is where we can help provide this as we move through this journey as well, is what are the 3 committees? There's probably only 3 committees, frankly, that you need to stand up, that are standing committees that should exist in perpetuity. And then every other thing that pops up where you need volunteers to do a project, to do an initiative, those are task forces. And you stand these folks up, you give them a project, and then when they're done, they fade off, and then you move forward. And so that's the process. So what we would, I think, be able to help is, as we move this direction, is you got to be clear about charges, you got to be clear about committee leadership, and what the measurement is, and what the requirements and composition are. So I think that's another thing that we can certainly help. What resources does the AANA have on evaluating state meetings? What are the metrics? And I'm thinking, since in the context of this conversation, I'm thinking this may be related to state board meetings. And we do have a tool, and we'll share a board evaluation, a board meeting evaluation. Question, Randy, I need to give this presentation to our board. Is that yes? So I want to make sure I'm not divulging someone's identity. To our board, that is possible. Please and thank you. Yes, this presentation will be provided to everyone. So look for the link. If clinical decisions are so different from strategic decisions, what is the framework out there that is evidence-based? Oh, okay. So there are numerous frameworks that folks can use for decision-making. There's a framework that I am particularly fond of that I learned in business school called the 4S framework that I think particularly effective. There are a dozen others. And here's the thing. It actually doesn't matter what framework you use. It's whether or not you're using a framework. So briefly, where we get tripped up on decision-making, particularly as an anesthetist, is that we go, see problem, solution. See problem, solution. When the truth is, the most important part of decision-making is not the solutioning. It's diagnosing the problem. I think but Einstein said that if he had 1 hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes on defining it. And a framework that slows that down, that gets you focused on diagnosing the problem and then developing a hypothesis, and then you get to do the fun stuff, which is identify the solution. That's a framework that I would recommend, and we'll certainly send it out. But yeah, that's, it's one of those things where I see it everywhere all the time, not just for the anesthetists, is because our brains are hardwired to run away from cheetahs and lions, right? So we bypass a lot of really important portions of decision making because we have been biologically programmed to react in a certain way. And then as an anesthetist, that's even more deeply inculcated in our clinical training, where we don't go, the patient has low blood pressure, and the patient's blood pressure is 60/30. Let's go through a decision-making framework about how I treat this. No, you give ephedrine or neosynephrine, and then maybe you go back. Well, not maybe. Then you go back and you try to understand what's really going on here. But in business decision-making and organizational decision-making, you should be spending the vast majority of your time in defining and diagnosing the problem. So great question. And we'll share that too. Good stuff. Let's see, some more questions. And thanks for the questions in the comments. Okay, thank you, Samyuthka. Okay. How much transparency should the board have with members? Great question, very difficult. We as an organization, and a lot of organizations don't get this right. there's this perception that we need to open the doors and have the boards involved, or I'm sorry, have the members involved in all the decisions and have complete transparency. That's really a bad idea, really, quite frankly. If you look at leading practices for high-performing boards, they're not open kimono. They're not sharing detailed board minutes. They're not inviting members to participate in 100% of their board meetings. That doesn't make any sense. The way that you honor the desire for transparency is as the board makes a decision, it communicates that decision and the calculus related to that decision in an open and transparent way, particularly if you're talking about controversial stuff. What high-performance boards don't do is invite everyone into the room and watch the board argue or debate, because that actually adversely impacts the quality of the debate. So I get that, especially in this country, that we think that, because we serve on a school board and that's how they do things, that's how nonprofits should do it, and they're wrong. They're just wrong. High-performance organizations, high-performing boards make the tough decisions behind closed doors, but then they communicate. They communicate effectively and transparently. I'm on a board that has heard from other board members that the national leadership does not represent the members. How do I get them to rethink their process and work to bring members in? I'm on a board that the national leadership does not represent. Okay, that's a challenge. I would like to know more. Why members are concerned that AANA board members are not representing them. And what's going on there more. I think as a state leader, I think that's probably not accurate. That our board of directors are actually very focused on the impact of their decisions on our state leadership and individual members of the organization. So I think it's about communication and support, and saying that we may not agree with every decision that the AANA board makes or the whatever state association board makes, but at the end of the day, they have the best interests of the organization in mind. Great question. We were set to renew our strategic plan this summer, but have put it off due to COVID. We feel that it would be best to do it in person. Any recommendations for doing strategic planning session without being in person? Perhaps doing something more short-term, like 12 months. Great question. I would say that I'm of the mind that this is the perfect time to be doing strategic planning. Yes, there is a lot of uncertainty in our environment right now, and you may not get everything right in terms of your predictions in the strategic goals that you make. I'll say something controversial, and I'll explain, because it's going to sound bad at first, but hopefully I pull it out of the nosedive after I say it. Strategic plans are useless. Strategic planning is absolutely imperative. And what I mean by that is you come together, you do the strategic planning process, you virus scan, you develop a vision, a mission, your core values, then you go to strategic goals and objectives and tactics. You're going to get a lot of that wrong. And that should not be a static process. A strategic plan is not something you do and then you put on the shelf for 3 to 5 years. It should be something that you do and then you continuously monitor and evolve it. Strategic plans should evolve. So the strategic plan that you're going to do is not going to be the strategic plan that you end with 3 years from now. And there's going to be a lot in it, or not maybe a lot, but there's some of it that you don't like. It's not relevant. Things have changed. Things have shifted. So I think you should get together virtually if that's the appropriate way of doing it. And I think you should do strategic planning. And the reason why I think that is because the environment has been extremely disrupted by COVID-19, and it has opened up enormous opportunity for the AANA and our state associations to exploit. And I know exploit kind of has negative connotations, but I'll use it. So I think, coming together, having a conversation with the board and say, yes, let's allocate a period of time, and Zoom calls are really painful when they go longer than 2 hours. So you might want to break it up into chunks and say, let's look at our old strategic plan to maybe use that as a foundation to grow, but acknowledge that things have changed in our environment. New opportunities have now been presented to us, and some challenges for sure. How can we change our strategic goals to respond to and exploit those new opportunities. I think now is the time. And I strongly recommend that folks do that. Even if you have a brand new strategic plan that you just finished a year ago, I know it sucks, but I think that you should take a look at it and say, what needs to be deprioritized? So strategy is about choice, right? So you're choosing what you're going to do, but just as importantly, you should be having conversations about choosing what you're not going to do. And another great question. Sorry, my phone. How do you stop a board member from over-talking and eating up valuable group time? What if the chair does not control for this? Yeah, this happens all the time. And ideally, the process would be that if someone let me back up. At the beginning, when you're onboarding, there should be a code of conduct. There should be a board value statement or a board experience statement, something to that nature that says, these are our values and these are our ground rules. No one should talk longer than 2 minutes. You don't get to talk again on this topic until everyone else has an opportunity to speak, and then we can recycle you. No one in this room, if you're talking about a board meeting, is more important than anyone else, including the chair. Now, do that, codify that, and then print it out if you need to, make it available. So when people start to deviate and pontificate and monopolize conversations, you say, excuse me, John Doe, as you recall, when we started in August or November or whatever, we all agreed to the following ground rules. What I'm observing here is that's not occurring, and it's my expectation and my ask that we honor what we agreed to do. And that goes back to the A word, accountability. It's not always easy to say that, it's not always easy to do that, but that is the secret sauce. There's another way of doing this. You remember, I recommended that every board meeting have a board evaluation. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up during the board meeting, put it in your comments. Say, and you don't have to be mean about it. Say, hey, I'm really concerned that one person or a group of people are monopolizing the conversation. What you don't want to do is ignore it, because it's going to make your life and everyone else on the board miserable, and it's going to empower this person or that group of people to continue to exhibit that dysfunctional behavior. Great question. That happens all the time. If a board member is not performing after interventions to get them to do things, what can you do? You can't fire him or her. Can you cut him loose? And that's where it goes to, it depends. And so this is where I say, look at your bylaws. I'd be very clear on what authority the board has relative to removing someone from the board. What I'd start with, similar to if we were in an employment setting, is having that crucial conversation and saying, John Doe, it appears to me that you're not showing up prepared for our board meetings, or you've missed 3 of the last 5 board meetings. That's inconsistent with our code of conduct, which you signed here. It's our expectation that you participate in whatever it is, 75% or 85% of the board meetings, and that you show up prepared and ready to contribute. And if you can't do that, then we need to have conversations about whether or not it's the right fit for you. Now, a certain percentage of people are going to say, whoa, okay, I'm going to do better. And then they do better. Now, whether they sustain that or not, it just depends. But some people will say, okay, you're right. You know what? I'm going to show up and I'm going to do better. There's a subset of the group that's going to say, you know what, I don't care. I can do other things. And then you have a conversation about removing them and say, hey, well, if this is not the right fit, what would you think about maybe stepping back and maybe this is not the right time? And if that person says yes, then you got a solution there, right? If someone says, yeah, I'll do better than doesn't, or is just obnoxiously counterproductive, then you go back to your bylaws and say, what recourse does this board have to remove this low-performing individual? And then rely on that. I strongly recommend, before you make a move in removing someone from the board, take a look at your bylaws, have that really clear, dot your I's and cross your T's, and be prepared for that person to go out and talk smack about you and the board. There's a high probability of doing that. Just prepare for it. That doesn't mean you don't do it, because I think you do. But just be prepared for it. It'll be painful potentially, but in the long run, you're going to replace him or her with someone who wants to be there, someone who's ready to contribute, and someone who's going to improve the culture of the board. Great question. Going back to see if I have any other questions, and I do. Next batch of questions. Okay. Next batch of 5 questions. What exactly is the board chairman's responsibility regarding taxes? Whom should be responsible for this? Board chairman, executive director? The answer is, it depends. I would start with your bylaws and see whether or not anything is in there relative to roles and responsibilities for these operational activities, including taxes. And then I would go to policies and procedures and see if there's anything there. If there's not anything in bylaws and there's not anything in policies and procedures, then you need to have a conversation with the board and say, hey, we've got a blind spot here. It is unclear who is responsible for this task. Is it a staff task if you have a association management company? Or is it a board function? And if it is a board function, who on the board? So I think I would recommend that approach. What do you do when board members are canceled by those social media influencers? Yeah, man, how much time do we have to discuss that? You know, social media is a gift and a curse, for sure. And you know, I'm sure I know I've been dragged through the mud in some chat, on some social media forums in the last 6 years of my board service. And I'm getting really okay with that by now, but it hurts, right? And so when we say canceled, I would say, look, let's start with, has there been a board behavior, an individual board member, has someone violated our code of conduct or our policies and procedures? And if so, then there's some serious conversations that need to occur there. And does it rise to the level of them requiring disciplinary action or remediation or whatever it is? If, however, someone is being attacked because they have a policy position that is unpopular with quote unquote influencers, then that's a very different animal. That's a very different situation. People have a right as board members to have opinions. Now, how they express those opinions, we already talked about that, right? You shouldn't be contradicting board decisions in public. But if someone is calling you out because you have a policy position that is they don't agree with, then I think that's when the board rallies around that individual or individuals and say, look, this is not how things work. And what you don't want to do is get engaged in a social media tit for tat. No one in the history of social media has ever won that fight, because those people have way more time than you do. So my recommendation would be that if there is someone who has not exhibited egregious behavior that's inconsistent with policies, procedures, code of conduct, and this is really about attacking someone for their opinions versus their actions, then you can potentially put a statement out if that gets to the level that the board needs to do that. But there's also the opportunity to just ignore it. And that is an individual decision based on the circumstances. Good stuff. And this social media stuff is huge. It is impacting every organization in this country. It is an amazing, amazing resource if it's leveraged appropriately. It is also a huge pain in the you-know-what for associations that aren't maybe sophisticated, or maybe there are things that are happening on social media that are really counterproductive. Next question. Leadership, just a comment, leadership is not about making you better, it's about making things better for everyone else. I totally agree. Leadership is about service and sacrifice. It's not about you individually. Totally agree. And I'm just reading these off, so I hope I don't say anything dumb here. You heavily discussed the importance of being an effective decision maker. This is an area I've always identified as somewhere that I struggle. Do you have a strong book recommendation to help grow in this area? Oh boy, do I. Couple things, and as we move forward, this will be a topic for another discussion because I see this coming up in other questions, so I think I'm on to something here. There's a book called Cracked It, and it's the 4S problem-solving method. You don't need to read the book. You can. I enjoyed it. It's a little academic, and I'm not trying to be patronizing there. I mean, it was kind of tough for me to get through, but it's a framework that I use. I think it's called Cracked, not Cracked It. That would be weird. Cracked. Now, shameless plug, on my LinkedIn page, I wrote an article that provides a framework, and I think it's called You're Terrible at Problem Solving or something like that. Yeah, it's very provocative. And we'll share it out. I'll ask the staff to take a note here and say, let's send out the article that I wrote on problem solving to the entire group. So that's what I've got. Next question. Are there any books, pamphlets, or worksheets that a current board can utilize to help guide accountability of board lobbyists and leadership? I'm processing. I'm not. I think it starts with the very first thing you do as a board is get in a room, identify your values and your ground rules. And the way I do this, or the way I recommend that you do this is, and it's really easy, is you say, okay, think of the best team you've ever been on. What about that team made it work? And then people start giving you, we were focused on goals. We treated each other well. We held each other accountable. We had fun. We behaved as a team. And then you start writing these things down. And then what I ask people to do is say, think of the worst team you've ever been on. The worst group, just nightmare. What about that team sucked for you? And then we get there was drama. Someone monopolized the conversation. And what's happening is you're asking them to create their ground rules, their values. You bring that together, create, not a real long document, a one-pager, and says, this is who we are, and this is what we believe, and this is how we're going to behave with each other. And then use that throughout the board year and reorient people constantly. And when people start to wander off into dysfunction land, say, well, time out, let's pull out our agreement here. That's probably the most effective way, and that's how I've done it in the past. Okay, great stuff. Oh boy, there's more questions. This is fun. And I'm watching, as people start to drift off, I'll call tonight. I'm okay going a little bit longer. How do we make being a part of a board more attractive to people that make $200,000 a year? We ask them to work like it's a job, but typically do not pay them. Yeah, you should be paying people, frankly. I know that sounds, I don't know, kind of obnoxious for me to say, because I think that it attracts the wrong people to board service. What I would say is to attract, going back to some of the comments I made earlier tonight, and this takes some time and some intentionality, is you create a culture of board service where you proactively and prospectively identify competent people and tap them on the shoulder. And then you bring them in. And you create a great experience for them. You carve out 50% of your board meeting to talk about strategy and learning and growth. And then they go out and tell their friends. And then you market that. And then what happens is you create an environment where board service is fun. And also, by the way, boards that do that become high-performing boards and accomplish a lot. So I think it is about developing the culture, developing the future-focused orientation, and then telling people about it, and then getting into programs and fishing in ponds where you'll find that skill set. Find someone who you think, well, this guy or this gal, they're too busy, they wouldn't want to do this. You can tap them on the shoulder. You'd be shocked how many high-performing, high-aptitude people will say, okay, I'll do this. But what happens is if you bring a high-performing, high-aptitude person into a low-performing board, they're not going to be around much longer. They're going to wander off because it's not worth their time. But if you create an environment where it is worth their time, not only are they going to stick around, they're going to tell their buddies. And next thing you know, you have a reputation of creating a board culture where you do epic stuff and it's fun and you learn and you grow and you get more out of it than you get into it. Good stuff. Randy, are key performance indicators for the 12-month health week best agreed upon by the board or a few decision makers? What I would say is, and it depends on what kind of, we have organizations that are participating today that don't have association managers. We have some that have their own full-time executive directors. So there's different resources. So I'm going to make a generalization that may or may not be completely germane. to your process or to your structure. But what I would say is the first board meeting after you get your culture right is, okay, let's take a look at our strategic plan if it's not sunsetted, and say, okay, let's take a look and say, let's make some adjustments here or there, or no, this is spot on, let's keep going. And then to say, all right, I would recommend creating a subset of that board, whether it's the executive committee or something else. It doesn't much matter, really, as long as it's a subset. Have them look at the strategic plan. And last year's, hopefully you had a operational plan or operational goals the preceding year. If not, that's okay. And then say, all right, let's create some goals. And then let's create some objectives, and let's create some measurement, and then send it to the full board for debate and approval, and then go. Now, if you have an executive director or full-time association manager, they should be stewarding that process for you. Now, that's not their strategic plan. Just like my board owns the strategic plan. That is not my strategic plan. That's my board's strategic plan. And so it depends. Either way, I think it requires a subset to development and then for board approval. And then you go, right? And then you have fun. Can I share a peer evaluation for board members? Yes, let's put that on the resource list, please. Great question. Do you have any suggestions or strategies on how to increase state member involvement? Our state voting percentage is typically 8 to 12%. Thanks. Let's have great question. I hear this all the time. Controversial question. Everybody take a deep breath. I'm going to say something provocative. The AANA's voting percentage is 14%-ish, plus or minus a couple. Who cares? Why do we think voting percentages reflect any meaningful measurement on engagement to the organization or attachment to the organization? Who says that that's important? Prove to me that voting percentages correlate with engagement to the association. The truth of the matter is 12% is pretty damn good. 14% is pretty great if you benchmark across the association space. I'm a member of multiple organizations. I don't vote in their elections. I can care less. So I think we have to disabuse ourselves of this thought that if our voting percentage drifts down, that somehow we're losing our members or they don't care about the organization or we're failing them. I don't know that that's true. I actually don't think it is true. I think as an individual, I don't vote for people I don't know. And why would I? There are better, I think, indicators of engagement, right, of connectedness or stickiness with your members than voting. So provocative question probably will get me in trouble. Should state association in-person board meetings be open or closed to its members or the public? Man, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble tonight. So I would say it depends. I will start with what's the culture of the organization? What are the historical precedents? Be careful breaking either one of those. Go to the bylaws. I always say that. Go to the bylaws. Make sure you don't do anything that's in conflict with your bylaws. Next, have a conversation with your board and ask, what's the value of having open board meetings? If we are in the boardroom together and we are advocating, we're debating about important decisions on behalf of our members, we make those decisions and we transparently communicate those decisions to the stakeholders, our members. Why do they need to be in the room? Now, the answer may be because that's how we like it and that's how it's going to be, and I guess that's fine. I will say that the literature that's coming out of leading organizations, the leading practices, best practices are they're not allowing or permitting people to attend board meetings for a variety of different reasons. Am I saying here that the AANA shouldn't have open board meetings? No, because I like my job. I want to be around. I'm not saying that the state association should close it off too. I just question the value of it. And if you're making strategic decisions and having strategic conversations that you don't want the bad guys to know about, if you're talking about personnel matters, you should absolutely close the doors and do not invite the board members and the individual organization members. And Otherwise, it becomes an individual decision about what the board wants. I take a different perspective on that, but I'm just one person. And so I'm starting to see we're losing people because it's getting late. And we're probably, oh boy, there's so many questions. So let's see if I can process these. And then I want to make sure that everybody has their questions answered. I should probably be more brief in my responses. In my state, legislation was introduced to remove supervision, like many other states. And we have some CRNA academic leaders who continue to support the ACT model, only and incorrectly assume that the board members have a personal agenda, and yet this is our strategic plan. How do you address this? There's a lot to unpack there. Wow. That's where I would go to, what's your board composition? Do you have a board that is composed of the relevant stakeholders? You know, go back to the personas. Are they represented? Are your independent practitioners represented? Are your chief CRNAs represented? Are your academics represented? Are your business folks represented? On and on. And if you have a board that's composed of diverse people with diverse opinions, with diverse backgrounds, you should be making good decisions. If, however, it's too homogenous and it's too one group or another group, then you get yourself into trouble with groupthink and bad decisions that could potentially adversely impact key constituents in your state. So that's what I recommend, is that, you know, air that stuff out. Make sure that you have a board. And if you don't have the subject matter expertise or opinion in the room, go out and invite someone to participate in the conversation so that you do. You know, be really cognizant of what your blind spots are as an organization. Okay, I lost that one, sorry. I think I might have just deleted a email. Okay, I think we'll call it a night because I think I accidentally deleted the email. If there's questions that I did not answer tonight, send them in. Well, I guess you already sent them in, and we'll respond back. So the staff will help me respond back. So we went 13 minutes over, which is not too bad, I don't think. So thank you, everybody, for listening to me go on and on for over an hour tonight. And I hope that you got something out of this. Remember, there'll be more coming soon. We'll be talking about complex problem solving. We'll be having CEO rounds coming up where we can get together and solve problems together in a little bit more probably dynamic environment. And I look forward to seeing you in future engagement opportunities. Have a great night. Thank you so much.